When I think of a Subaru, iconic models like the Outback and the Forester quickly come to mind. However, here in America, the best-selling Subaru was actually the Crosstrek, and last year, the company moved over 155,000 units. So as you can see this week, we're actually out here just outside of Palm Springs, California to drive the all-new version of the Crosstrek. This is now in its third generation, a 2024 model, and just like the prior generations, you can see it's essentially still a lifted-up Impreza, but Subaru has given it a lot more capability, a lot more refinement, and a big improvement in terms of technology on the inside. So the big question I want to answer, if you guys are in the market for a subcompact crossover SUV, has Subaru managed to raise the bar yet again with this all-new Crosstrek? That's what we're here to find out. So before we start talking about the exterior design changes for the 2024 Crosstrek, I thought I'd pop the hood and show you guys what's powering this thing. Now, in this video, we're only going to be driving the base engine. Subaru is going to offer a choice of either a 2-liter 4-cylinder Boxer 4 or a 2.5-liter engine. We'll be driving the 2.5 in about 2 months. You're going to have to wait to see a driving video on that. But this engine here is essentially carried over from the prior generation. It's a 2-liter naturally aspirated Boxer flat 4 with direct injection. It makes the same power as 152 horsepower and 145 pound-feet of torque. Subaru did say that they've updated the harmonics of the engine. It's got better engine mounts. It's all in the name of improving NVH, noise, vibration, harshness, which we'll talk about when we get this vehicle out on the road. Fuel economy is also pretty good. It's rated at 27 in the city, 34 on the highway. That's actually among the tops in the segment among 9 non-hybrid vehicles. This vehicle only comes with a Lineartronic CVT. So if you guys had the old Crosstrek, you used to be able to get that with a 6-speed manual. Sadly, that is now off the table because Subaru says that most people ended up buying the automatic, which is why they only offer it with the automatic. Because it's a Subaru, it also comes standard, of course, with their symmetrical all-wheel drive system, which we're going to be using later on this video to take this vehicle out off the pavement, which, as you can see, we're actually out here on sand right now filming this car. And in terms of the range, Subaru says it has a 16.5-gallon gas tank, so you should be looking at 450 miles of plus in terms of range, which should be some really great figures. And in terms of towing, Subaru actually says this model can tow up to 1,500 pounds, even with the base engine. And as it sits, this vehicle here weighs in at just under 3,300 pounds. Subaru actually says it's lighter this year because of some updates that they've made to the structure. But let's go ahead and close up the hood, which, as you can see, is held up by a prop rod, and talk about the exterior styling of this vehicle. Now, Subaru actually tells us that this car has been in their lineup since 2013, so almost 12 years now. And this car was actually kind of an experiment. They essentially took an Impreza hatchback and jacked it up, gave it 8.7 inches of ground clearance, some cladding, and it's been a huge sales success for them. They did around 155,000 units in 2022 here in America. It was the best-selling model here in Subaru's lineup in the States. And you can see for the all-new version, they basically played it safe in terms of the design. This is still built off of the Subaru global product architecture, which means it's instantly recognizable as a Crosstrek. You can see the front end has their corporate hexagonal grille, although it has gone frameless and it appears to be a little bit larger. This premium trim that I'm showing you is 1 notch above the base. It has kind of these gray accents with these hexagons in the actual grille. Lots of gray plastic cladding, typical Subaru fashion. Although I am surprised to see they're pretty restrained with the cladding. Although let me know what you guys think of this little area here in the comments section. If you guys go for the sport trim, it's actually got some kind of like a yellow accent, but you can see here on the premium, it doesn't have that. For this new generation, what I love is Subaru has made their steering adaptive LED headlights. Full LED headlights is standard. Even on the base trim, before you had to go for a limited trim and up, or the top of the line model to get the LEDs. All the base ones look pretty cheap. You can see you have an LED daytime running light, which is just the low beam, LED high beams, and then you have an incandescent turn signal. And then the premium as an up will have these LED fog lights, which again gives it a much more of a premium, more upscale look. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. This exterior color is called Dark Sapphire Blue. It's a really nice exterior color, as you can see. They've essentially taken this off of the BRZ, and it looks good, especially with the gray cladding that you get, of course, with the Crosstrek. Now, moving around the side profile, you can see Subaru actually kept the dimensions of this vehicle pretty similar because They tell us that customers like the compact dimensions of this car. Its wheelbase is 105.1 inches long, which is literally just 0.2 inches longer than the prior generation. Its overall length is 176.3 inches long, which, as you guys know, that's among the bigger end of the scale, because if you look at competitors like the Ford Bronco Sport, the Toyota Corolla Cross, this is about 2 to 3 inches longer overall. The difference, of course, is in the width. This car is around 70.9 inches wide. That's about 3 inches narrow versus something like the Ford Bronco Sport. And then you can see in terms of the height, Subaru actually says they made this a little bit lower, but it still has, of course, the roof rails, which are very noticeable because Subaru tells us that a lot of owners actually end up using this vehicle to put stuff on the roof, including like a tent if you guys plan to go camping. Now, one of the elements where they've been able to improve the weight of this vehicle or reduce it is because the fenders, they are now aluminum. So of course that's going to lighten and strengthen the vehicle as well. You have this cladding along the wheel arches as well, which is definitely giving that more rugged look. In terms of the ground clearance, it stays the same at 8.7 inches, which I suspect Subaru is probably going to work on a wilderness version at some point. They didn't confirm that here, but expect the ground clearance to go up if they do offer that. You can see this premium grade has a 16-inch wheel. It has a relatively decent design. You can see it's got Yokohama Geolander SUV road tires, essentially. It's riding on a 225/60 R17. You've got all disc brakes, all independent suspension. Subaru did add this kind of functional air vent here that goes over the wheel arch. This is, again, going to help with the aerodynamics of this vehicle. They said that they've made the mirrors, the roof rails, and these little outlets here, improving the aerodynamics of this vehicle, which allows it to get slightly better fuel efficiency. The side mirrors you can see here are gray painted on the premium. You have these integrated turn signal mirrors, which is nice. And then you can see here on the roof, these rails, which are gonna be standard if you guys go for the premium and up trims. The base doesn't have the rails. Subaru tells us that in terms of the static weight, so that's if the vehicle is sitting standstill, this can hold up to 700 pounds on the roof. So if you plan to put a roof tent on here, that's gonna be great for those of you who go camping. If you're doing the dynamic load, it'll hold around 176 pounds. So that's when the vehicle is moving. You can put nearly 180 pounds of gear on the actual roof when you guys have the proper equipment. Now you can see here, the window trim here is blacked out, which is nice. More of that cladding along the side here, which is very tasteful. I like how Subaru didn't make this super like annoying and just overwhelming in terms of the cladding like I've seen on some models. And in the rear, you can see this is built off of the new Impreza architecture where you've got these new taillights, which kind of have like a C shape to them. It's very Honda. Honda was kind of using this design for their taillights for years. And you can see the taillights themselves have an LED combination. You have an accent for the taillight, incandescent, however, for the turn signals and the reverse lights. And then you can see here, Subaru tends to do a lot of badging. There's a lot of badging here for Subaru all-wheel drive, Crosstrek. There's symmetrical all-wheel drive badge, and then you have more cladding underneath here. No visible exhaust tips, which again, Subaru did that on purpose. To improve, I would say, probably the breakover angle or departure angle of this vehicle, because remember, it's supposed to be able to go off-roading. And then when you look at the cargo space, there is no power liftgate, unfortunately. Subaru tells us that this is on the lower end of their model lineup, so they said that the power tailgate wasn't necessary. But the cargo area is still pretty much the same. You have just under 20 cubic feet of total space with the second row seats up. You can see we've got a lot of our gear in here, but there's a very usable area here behind the hatch. If you fold down the second row seats, it expands it out to around 54.7 cubic feet. That's a little bit less versus the last year's model, but again, this is gonna be among the best in the segment. It actually has about the same space as a Honda HR-V, which that model has always been kind of the benchmark in terms of space. Underneath the floor here, you can see it's a Subaru, so you've got a temporary spare tire for those of you who don't want to have to deal with a fix-a-flat kit, which is definitely going to be nice, especially if you plan to go off-roading a lot. So let's go ahead and talk about the interior of this all-new third-generation Crosstrek. Now, first, getting into the vehicle, it has that nice higher SUV-like seating position with nearly 9 inches of ground clearance. You kind of just step right into the vehicle. As I get in and shut the door would have a solid-sounding thunk if there wasn't a water bottle. Let's try that again. Actually sounds pretty good. Remember, this is built off of the Subaru global product architecture. Now, here's the key fob for the vehicle. You can see most of the Crosstrek models come with their intelligent access key. I believe you do have to go for at least a premium grade, but all of them should have the push button start as standard. You can see it's got lock, unlock, open up the trunk, although it's not a power liftgate, and then there's a panic button. If you also have access to the Subaru Starlink app, you should be able to remote start this vehicle through your smartphone, which is also nice as well. Now, the button hasn't really moved. It's still right there. It kind of gets blocked by the steering wheel a little bit. But starting the vehicle up, it has the typical Subaru startup chime. And then of course the big story with this new generation Crosstrek is the fact that it has the new 11.6-inch display here. Now previously, the biggest screen that you can get on a Crosstrek was the 8-inch display. If you guys go for a base version, it'll have the twin display layout where you'll have a 7-inch display at the top and at the bottom. One is for audio, one is for functions of the vehicle. This screen here is standard on this premium graded up, and it definitely looks impressive, especially on a vehicle that's as small as the Crosstrek. You can see this is among the biggest that you're going to find in the segment. It does include features like wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto. So again, very impressive that Subaru is throwing in those features, especially when you look at the price point of this car. Now in terms of the materials, let's talk about that really quickly. The door panel, you can see, has a hard touch plastic material here on the upper portion. It's nice and padded over here with more of that cloth material on this area. There's a carbon fiber look trim along this area here. The door handles aren't metal accented, but remember, this is the premium trim. It's on the lower end of the trim scale. Down here you can see it's padded where it's stitched. You can see this is kind of like a faux StarTex material, which again makes this interior feel a little bit more durable. The window controls, you can see, have a relatively high quality feel to them. The front windows are automatic one touch up and down, and Subaru says that they've actually made an adjustment to the windows so when it's closing it actually will slow down right before it gets to the fully closed position. So again, they're just trying to sweat the details there and make this car appeal a little bit more upscale. In terms of the rest of the dashboard here, you can see the steering wheel. This is the current Subaru steering wheel that we've seen on a lot of other products. On the premium grade, you can see it's not leather wrapped, so it's got the urethane wheel, which feels a little bit cheap, but it is a really nice nicely sized steering wheel. It's got a manual tilt and telescoping adjustments, which there's a good amount of adjustability and range. There's a lot of buttons, of course, for the EyeSight driver assist technology. There's paddles on the wheel. The horn actually sounds somewhat puny, but it also doesn't sound as puny as something like a Toyota Corolla. So it's definitely an interesting sounding horn. The one thing I do, however, like are these seats. Now these seats have been redesigned. Subaru says that they've made the seats a little bit more supportive, a little bit softer. You can see the premium has kind of like a very durable feeling fabric where it almost looks waterproof, and there's kind of like a textured pattern here in the actual seat inserts. I have an 8-way power driver's seat here on this model, which is part of an option package, and there's also a 2-way power lumbar support. The Crosstrek has never had that before, so Subaru has now added it for this new generation, which they say is going to improve the overall comfort, which that's going to, of course, depend on you and your personal, taste. But in terms of the rest of the dash design or materials, you can see this is a hard touch material here. However, this upper portion is soft touch. This area here is hard, along with this area over the actual instrument panel hood. And then you can see it's a little bit dark in here, but I suspect if you guys go for sport, you'll have some nice yellow accents with the StarTex material. And if you go for limited, that's how you can get leather in the vehicle, which, as you can see, the premium doesn't have that feature. No heads-up display as well, and then the instrument panel, you can see, is kind of basic looking. I was expecting Subaru to at least enlarge the LCD display, but you still have kind of like a 4-inch helper screen in the center along with two traditional analog dials, which if you like the traditional look, that's going to be nice, but again, everybody's kind of going to an all-digital display. Even Honda has a half-digital display in the HR-V. Now let's come over here to this infotainment system, which right now, for some reason, my phone is not connecting, but it was connecting earlier. So let me see if I can get it to connect. Go to phone over here and let's tell it to connect, because I do want to show you guys what the CarPlay looks like. It's going to try to reconnect here. The Starlink system, I've had some issues with it in the past, and I definitely noticed that it's kind of slow to respond when it first starts up. You can see there's the CarPlay. I had to manually tell it to connect. Most of the times, however, it'll automatically connect. You can see it's a full screen CarPlay. Subaru updated that back in 2021, I believe, where they added that, which if you guys have, like, for example, Waze pulled up, it looks pretty good on the map screen, and you have your actual home button there. You've got an actual display over here that you can kind of change and show different information, where you can kind of cycle through your water temperature, oil temperature, average speed. You can also show weather information if it's available. You can turn on and off the X mode, which every Crosstrek comes standard with that. That's a software system for the all-wheel drive system to help you get out of areas where you might be stuck. And then if I put the vehicle to reverse, you can see there's your backup camera, which includes trajectory and markers, but no full 360 camera. That's not available on the Crosstrek, because remember, this is on the lower end of the scale. You can see the climate functions are down here. So there's two parts to the screen where it doesn't change. Up here and down here, you can see you've got your touch climate control functions over here, where if you touch that, it gives you more different controls. You have dual zone automatic climate control, which is nice. However, Subaru has also stressed that they've kept around some hard buttons. You can see there's a knob here for volume and tuning. You have physical hard buttons for the climate as well. And then you also have hard buttons for the heated seat controls. This is optional, of course, but I know the seat controls definitely look old, but I also appreciate how Subaru is giving us an actual hard button instead of putting it in the screen like I've seen in the Subaru Outback, for example. So that's definitely nice. This screen, in terms of the software, could use some improvements, but I like how at least Subaru has added some wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Now, in terms of the rest of the center stack, you can see there's a nice area where you can put your phone over here. You've got 2 USB charging ports, an A and a C, or an A and a C. This model here doesn't have a wireless charger. You have to go to a higher trim to get that. This controls the Lineartronic CVT. The shifter itself, I'm surprised that Subaru is still using a traditional shifter. You can see it's even got a manual mode here in addition to having it on the paddles. You have a new electronic parking brake. This helps to free up some space here in the center console. You've got 2 cup holders over here, an actual 12-volt power outlet over there, and then you have a slightly padded center console, which is not leather stitched. I suspect the higher trims are going to give you that, but if you open this up, you can see pretty good amount of storage in there. There's no light, there's no power outlets. It's all, again, on the outside of the actual console. Above me, you can see this model for $2,600 extra has a sunroof, which is nice. It just has a very traditional shade. You can also tilt it, you can slide it open. You have just incandescent lighting here for the map lights. Not really anything in terms of LED lighting. Remember, this is a base model in Subaru's lineup. And then if you open up the glove box here, you can see it's a bin style, it's damped, but it's not lined with felt. It's actually a pretty big size. So in terms of the interior, if you guys have spent some time in a lot of modern Subarus, you're gonna notice that it feels pretty familiar. I like the new infotainment screen display. I also like how comfortable, and I also like the sight lines in this vehicle. But in terms of outright best tech, you're gonna find a little bit better infotainment software from some of its competitors. Moving on to the rear seat of the new Crosstrek. Now, because this vehicle isn't really that much bigger on the outside, second row legroom here basically stays the same. This vehicle has always been a little bit more spacious than some competitors. You have 36.5 inches of legroom back here, which is decent. Remember, this is built off of an Impreza. I'm 5'7", so I can kind of get back here. I can get pretty comfortable. There is a hump here that's going to intrude on the middle passenger, but there's a pretty good foot space underneath the front seats, which is nice. You have 2 USB charging ports here, an A or a C and an A. There's no rear seat vents, and then you only get 1 storage pocket. But surprisingly, I can get back here, I can cross my legs. I have a decent amount of headspace. But remember, I'm only 5'7", so if you guys have friends who are over 6 feet, this might feel a little bit more cramped. In terms of the materials, you can see it's definitely a harder plastic, kind of scratchy material back here as opposed to the front, which had the cloth. You do have a padded area over here, and then the windows are not one touch down or up in the back here, but the controls, they feel pretty good. In terms of the stereo, I forgot to mention that in the front. This is just the standard Subaru 6-speaker sound system. It's nothing super special. If you guys want the Harman Kardon system, you have to go up again to the limited grade, which we'll be driving in a couple of months. These seats do fold down 60/40, of course. There's an armrest that folds down here that gives you 2 cup holders. And then I'm trying to see if this offers a, nope, it doesn't offer a recline function. It just basically folds or latches into place. But overall, the back seat is definitely on par with the class, maybe slightly better. But for those of you who plan to use child seats, for example, you are going to notice that the doors, they definitely open up nice and wide. So that's going to assist for those of you who need to put a child seat back here. So here we are back in the Palm Springs area. We're actually heading over to the Salton Sea, or near the Salton Sea, heading to Joshua Tree National Park in the redesigned Subaru Crosstrek. Now, this vehicle started out as an experiment for Subaru, but you know what? That experiment seriously paid off because this was their best-selling model last year. It outsold basically every other vehicle in its class by as much as like double in terms of numbers. I think the second closest vehicle was the Ford Bronco Sport, but regardless of numbers, this is a very important vehicle for Subaru because it is a car that essentially attracts a lot of people to the brand. With this vehicle, it looks like there's this Kia Rio or Forte stuck over there. With this vehicle, Subaru basically brings younger buyers into their brand and then moves them up into a bigger vehicle as they need the additional space. And for this next generation Crosstrek, this is now in the 3rd generation, it's essentially built off of a heavily modified version of the global architecture. Subaru says the torsional rigidity is up by 10%. They've sort of retuned the suspension, although it's still basically the same geometry. And the powertrains are carried over, although they have improved the NVH, which I'll talk about later on during the driving scene. But overall, this is the driving scene for the 2-liter, which has 152 horsepower. And putting my foot down, The CVT is very responsive, but boy does it like to really push that engine all the way up to like 6,000 RPM. And it's going to be, you're going to need the revs because this is a naturally aspirated engine. We are thankfully at sea level. At least that's what Siri told us, is that we were like at 70 feet below sea level or something like that. So it has decent acceleration for the majority of people. I mean, we'll do a 0 to 60 test later on. We'll see what we can actually get, but in terms of the responsiveness, the CVT goes about its business just fine, and it also has 8 virtual ratios. If you guys want to go into a manual mode, pull the paddle here, you can actually feel it start to shift, do these fake gears, which most people probably won't use. You'll just end up either using the SI drive into intelligent or sport mode, and that will be the most of your driving modes you'll be selecting through. But let's pass these bicyclists over here, which again, it's got decent power. Really what I appreciate is how responsive the transmission is and how smooth the engine is. And the steering of this car. It got the new dual pinion electric power steering assist, which is the same steering system out of the WRX, which is a good system. It actually does improve the responsiveness. This vehicle feels sportier than I thought it would, considering the fact that we've got 8.7 inches of ground clearance. You have a nice higher elevated seating position. And we also had this vehicle out on the highway earlier, and it surprisingly had very good highway road manners. It was comfortable in terms of the ride quality. It was relatively quiet, very little NVH. And this vehicle cruised along at 75, 80 miles an hour with very little fuss. A lot of these economy car-based crossover vehicles, they can feel a little bit floaty and just nervous on highways. The Crosstrek definitely doesn't feel that way. It feels a little bit more mature, a lot more refined, and that's kind of Subaru's goal when they were developing this new generation Crosstrek. But let's go ahead and switch over to, earlier we found a nice straight road to do a 0 to 60, so let's go ahead and cue over to that scene and see what this 2-liter can actually do. So Subaru doesn't quote a 0 to 60 time, but this is the base engine. We'll be driving the 2.5 in about a couple of months. So let's go ahead and see what we can get here at sea level in terms of 0 to 60. I have the vehicle in its sport drive mode here. This is all-wheel drive. It's got a CVT. Let's go ahead and brake torque it. Wow, it actually feels decently quick off the line. Remember, only 152 horsepower, and the CVT's holding the revs up. 10.02 seconds, so yes, not very quick, but most other vehicles in this segment are also pretty slow. The HR-V comes to mind. We got around 11 seconds in that car when we first did our first drive. I suspect the 2.5 is probably going to be about 2.5 seconds faster, 0 to 60. But you know what? Despite this car's kind of sluggish performance in terms of numbers, it actually feels pretty good out in the real world. Like this car, when you put your foot down, the CVT is very responsive. The engine also has gotten a lot smoother over the years, especially for this new generation. They've really refined up everything. And even though that number is terrible, I suspect most people will get into this car and they'll just really appreciate how peppy it feels and the fuel efficiency. This car is really new, but we've been averaging so far about just under 32 mpg and mostly highway driving. When we started out this drive, it was showing about 580 miles on a full tank. Now that did eventually change to be about 450 on a full tank, which is pretty impressive considering this vehicle is not a hybrid. So just over 10 seconds 0 to 60 is perfectly acceptable. I know in a world where you can buy a lot of these new cars that are like 6 seconds or less 0 to 60, this is not fantastic, but the 2.5 should rectify that, and I suspect Subaru is probably going to work on perhaps a hybrid version at some point, or even a turbo. I'd love to see them put the 2.4 turbo in this vehicle, but again, Subaru is very tight-lipped about future product. But overall, it has acceptable acceleration in real-world usage, not necessarily great in terms of times, but what most buyers are going to care about is the fact that I've got these comfortable seats, which, by the way, the seats have been redesigned. They have a little bit more cushioning, they have a little bit more bolstering, and you also get a two-way power lumbar for the first time, so that's going to make the seats better. I also have an 8-way power driver's seat, which is definitely nice. The driving position is good. I can see out of the vehicle really well. That's always been a Subaru strength. His visibility is excellent. And their eyesight driver assistance tech got an improved wide angle camera, so it works a little bit better. It also has evasive steering assist, so if you're driving along and it sees there's somebody in your lane, it'll actually start to brake, and then it'll check to see if there's anybody in your blind spot, and if there's nobody there, it actually will steer the vehicle on its own around the obstacle, which is pretty cool tech. Subaru's been really great with that, and now that their eyesight is standard, it definitely is elevating the bar here in terms of safety. I also love how their LED headlights with steering assist are also standard. So So that's something that before you had to buy the Limited to get the LED headlights on this vehicle, which kind of cheapened the look without it. Now it's standard across the board, even on this base premium. So in terms of features, Subaru's really nailing it there. In terms of the design, it looks like an evolution of the prior generation, but a little bit more sleek. And the driving dynamics on the road are pretty good. I mean, this is about what I expected. It's going to be exceeding most buyers' expectations, especially if you're trading in your old Crosstrek. But this is a Subaru, so Subaru is very proud of the fact that a lot of people actually take their vehicles off-road. So they actually are having us drive out to an off-road course. So let's go ahead and cue over to the footage and see how this Crosstrek does when the pavement ends. So for the off-road course, Subaru has us on this really cool obstacle trail, and they tell us that they want us to start off the vehicle in X mode. So to do that, you go to the screen here to engage X mode, and that essentially adjusts the software in the all-wheel drive system in this vehicle to give us more traction, to send power to the wheels with the most grip. And this is a test of course, the all-wheel drive system, the tires, the ground clearance. We have almost 9 inches of ground clearance. And I know on camera, these off-road courses don't always look all that impressive. I've got my editor Rob out there right now filming the outside, and this is a pretty steep incline. And there's a lot of rocks. It's a very rutted area. So again, it is a location or an obstacle that I suspect most owners probably wouldn't do. And I don't know if vehicles like the HR-V would be able to do this, but again, look at that. It's sending power to the wheel with the best grip, and it does a pretty good job too at that. I'm very impressed, actually. I'm just lightly applying more throttle, and it's just sending power. I can feel it moving the power around, which is really quick. It does it very seamlessly, and you don't have to worry about making any adjustments.
Yeah, you remember to wait for me.
And because this vehicle has nearly 9 inches of ground clearance, you don't really have to worry too much about scraping. I am a little skeptical though, because this model here just has Yokohama Geolandar, SUV tires, but they're definitely more of like a car tread pattern. But I have to say, considering that this is right off of the showroom floor, and we're able to go up this mountain basically with all these rocks and ruts and the dirt, this thing just kind of blazes right through it. And you have to be asking yourself, could something like a Corolla Cross or an HR-V get through this? I'm skeptical because those vehicles have about 1.5 inches less ground clearance. As we go down this hill here, you can actually feel the X mode on. It automatically turns on the hill descent control. So it holds the speed at around 4 miles an hour, and it's applying the brakes. It's kind of like an off-road cruise control. I really don't have to do much. It just kind of does it for me. The one thing this car is, however, missing is skid plates. I suspect Subaru should offer it from the dealership as an accessory. Right now, of course, there is no wilderness version, but that could change. My editor, of course, is not really strapped in very well. The seats could use a little more a little more aggressive bolstering, but again, this thing's just kind of trucking through. And what I love about this car is the small size. I've been driving a lot of bigger trucks and SUVs through off-road courses, and this thing is so small, you can just kind of squeeze through these tighter spots. Again, we haven't scraped still. It's still kind of applying the brakes, which is nice. But yeah, I'd say this kind of terrain is probably what owners might do when they're trying to get to a campsite. And because it does have an independent suspension, it does ride well, although I'd argue that perhaps maybe a car with a live axle in the back would give you more wheel articulation. But again, this isn't bad. We're about to go up a pretty steep incline here. Again, just apply a little bit of light throttle. It just kind of gets up very easily. And then now up ahead here, they want us to go through these gates, these two kind of white poles here. And I'm gonna let my editor out because he's gonna follow me down the hill. All right, so we're gonna go through these little white poles here, or they're kind of like plastic pieces. But as soon as I go down, they said to go right. Okay, I see it now. This is actually pretty steep, because I couldn't even see over it at all, but this is where the car is automatically using the brakes. I'm not hitting the brakes, so it's holding the brakes here and holding my speed at around 2 miles an hour. It's very impressive, actually. It's so smooth, and it just does it so easily. Did you trip? So again, this is an area right here where you can feel the wheels start to come down a little bit, and really just flexing the articulation for this vehicle. It's got a ton of ground clearance for the segment. I mean, this is the same kind of ground clearance that you get from a Jeep, and this is in a Subaru, so I'm impressed. Color me impressed. Whenever Subaru decides to do a wilderness version of this car, it should have over 9 inches of ground clearance, skid plates, all-terrain tires. It's going to turn the Crosstrek into a little beast. So after spending the day driving the all-new 2024 Subaru Crosstrek here at Joshua Tree National Park, it's pretty obvious to me that Subaru has made some critical changes to this vehicle, keeping in mind, of course, the type of buyer who buys the 2024 Crosstrek. This vehicle has all of the necessary goodies to appeal to somebody who wants to live an active lifestyle. It's got that almost 9 inches of ground clearance. It's got a fuel-efficient 2-liter naturally aspirated engine with a CVT transmission. It's got their standard symmetrical all-wheel drive system. And as you guys saw, the driving of this vehicle is pretty much on par with what you expect from a Crosstrek. It drives essentially like a car that is raised up a little bit. It's really easy to drive. It's really smooth. It's really efficient. It's relatively quiet. And they've also really improved the technology in this vehicle. And as you guys saw as well, off-roading, you can actually just buy this thing off the showroom floor and take it out into an area like this and go camping with it. You can go hiking with it. You can take it, you can load up some bikes on the roof. So this is a vehicle that clearly fits your active lifestyle. And it's no wonder that Subaru continues to sell a ton of these. I mean, last year they did around 155,000 units. It outsold everything else in the segment by as much as twice the amount of units. The Ford Bronco Sport essentially is the one that's going to be closest to it. But if you are looking to get your hands on the new 2024 Crosstrek, this vehicle is going to start production very soon. And Subaru says that you can expect to see it in showrooms by early spring. So you're going to have to wait another month or two. Base pricing for this vehicle is going to begin at $24,995, which is essentially the same price as the previous generation, although technically that model was a little bit less if you got the manual. Subaru, remember, has dropped the manual transmission. Most of you are going to probably want to go for the premium trim, which the premium is around $1,200 more, starting at $26,145. My tester with destination and the $2,600 option package that gets you some of the extras this has, like the blind spot monitoring and the sunroof. This one here comes to around $29,645, which again, under $30,000 for just this much car really shows just how strong value that the Crosstrek is. Keep in mind, if you guys do want to go to the sport or the limited grades, those are the ones you're going to have to go for if you want the bigger 2.5 engine. That's going to start at either $29,000 for the sport and around $31,000 for the limited. So all in, you can get a Crosstrek for around $33,000, which undercuts a lot of rivals by as much as like $10,000. The main competitor I see for the Crosstrek is the Bronco Sport. You can get that up to well over $45,000 on certain trims. Well, with all that said, I do think Subaru has done a phenomenal job here. And if you are in the market for, of course, a small, active lifestyle crossover SUV, the new Crosstrek should definitely make it to the very top of your list. But with all that said, hope you guys have enjoyed my full overview on this redesigned model. If you're also looking to see the latest cars I'm testing, be sure to follow me on Instagram at redline_reviews. Like us on Facebook, and as always, guys, please keep subscribing to the Redline Reviews YouTube channel for all the latest reviews. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you all in the next video. Include an LED daytime running light, although the LED running light is basically just a what is that? Sorry.
I think that was your name tag.
No, it was a B. It was a B. I heard it.